Welcome to the Westminster channel. I'm delighted to say I've got Patrick O'Flynn joining me again today. Patrick, how are you?
Yeah, fine, Michael. How's it going?
Not too bad. The page is growing very quickly. People clearly want that new media alternative here on YouTube. And I'm going to start off. You're of course a veteran media and commentator, a lot of experience in the industry. You've written a piece for The Spectator, making 2 points. You say why the BBC licence fees has to go and will go, in your opinion. Can you elaborate on that a bit for us?
Yeah, well, it's just a sort of embedded bias has got too deep and too profound, and it's fairly obvious, I think, to most of us now that the BBC is not going to change. I mean, since I wrote the piece a few days ago, you've got a new Director General in Tim Davie who's coming in saying all the right things, but the idea that one guy is going to be able to take on a whole embedded culture of liberal left woke bias, it's just for the birds as far as I'm concerned. It's gone too far. And what really provoked me was Nick Robinson put out a tweet basically inviting all his followers to lobby Ofcom to prevent licenses or revoke or withhold licenses to broadcast from two new proposed current affairs channels, which would have been, non-left bias. I mean, Nick Robinson likened them to Fox News, but, that again was very complacent because many of us would argue that the BBC and the other terrestrial broadcast news programs have become like the opposites of Fox News. They're just so embedded with woke liberal left bias that actually many viewers wouldn't mind an actual Fox News in Britain to counterbalance it. But even more popular would be something that just gives you the news straight.
Yeah, you say in your Spectator piece that there are two plausible ways for the BBC to try and justify its funding by a compulsory licence fee. One is to ensure rigorous fact-based objectivity. The other is to allow views in the news, but to ensure there is a viewpoint diversity. And you make the point the BBC has chosen neither. Why do you think that is?
I think, and this is something Tim Davie has alluded to in his early days, that they're kind of making programmes for each other within Broadcasting House, within all the London-based BBC outlets. There's a huge groupthink at work, which has gone unchallenged. And things that the normal person out in the country would think were perfectly reasonable, the BBC would think were, far right. And the things that the BBC think are uncontroversial, for instance, that we should be throwing overboard many of the high points of our culture, such as Rule Britannia or Land and Hope and Glory or whatever else, out in the country, people look at that askance. So there's a complete separation of the BBC type of person from the wider audience. And so when the BBC even talks about increasing diversity, you now look and actually ethnic minorities are overrepresented on screen, and clearly they mean the diversity in the sense of ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, women. What they don't mean is working class people as opposed to private educated middle class people like most of them. They don't mean people who aren't from London and the home counties. There's very few provincial English accents and people from normal backgrounds and normal state schools at any position of seniority in the BBC. So I think it's just grown completely separate from the majority of the licence fee payers and also the left. I think the left lose elections, don't they? But they regard politics, even if they're not elected into it, as a full-time occupation. And so they're remorseless about, every new cultural battle that they can pick. They will pick, and then they'll push on. And it needs far more determined, not just Tim Davie, but it needs government, it needs all of us really to lean into the wheel to resist that. And really, what's the point now? Technology is making the license a bit redundant anyway. If the BBC thinks it's good value for money, then let it try on subscription services, because its claim to speak for the whole nation, I think, is too many years gone. It missed the immigration story right at the start of the 20th century, uncontrolled immigration. It obviously missed the Brexit story. It's taking a particular skewed angle on the race baiting of Black Lives Matter. I think Andrew Marr 15 years ago said it had a cultural liberal bias. You know, that's got many times worse. So for a lot of your audience, for all their adult life, the BBC has been systematically biased. So the idea that it will turn on a sixpence overnight and become representative again, I don't believe it.
Now, you make the point in your Spectator piece again. You say, soon enough, we shall know whether Boris Johnson's administration is ready to dip a toe in these waters by decriminalising non-payment of the licence fee from 2022. Patrick, we're hearing all sorts of reports that this seems to be on the cards. I even saw one report that said it was a done deal. Where do you rate the chances of this actually happening?
Well, I think it's 50-50 because I think Tim Davie, you know, who people tell me who've looked into his career and life, that at one point he was a senior member of Hammersmith and Fulham Conservatives. You know, Conservatives are a very clubby group of people. I'm sure Tim Davie has left his politics at the front door of the BBC, but nonetheless, those links will be useful to him in trying to make a final pitch to the sort of wet conservative element that really culturally won't like this idea of seeing the BBC for what it is now and will prefer to remember it for as it was and won't want to pick that battle. So I think that's on the one hand. On the other hand, you have people like Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson himself, you would hope, after the way he's been treated, who hopefully will see the BBC as it is and see the fact that so much magistrates' court time is taken up with this infringement of liberty, and will bite the bullet on it. So it could go either way, as is the case with almost every policy issue under this Prime Minister, it seems.
But overall, Patrick, in the slightly longer term, do you think the licence fee eventually is going to be binned off?
Yes, I do, because I think there are so many people at senior levels within the BBC who've kind of imbibed on the Kool-Aid and they're not giving up this cultural power. You know, about 2/3 of the broadcast media voice is the BBC. It's massively dominant. You know, it's a very, very useful tool of the cultural left. And even as they've lost election after election, they've been able to use the BBC to push their agenda in the battle of ideas. I don't see them being ready to give that up. I don't see anyone like Tim Davie being strong enough to make them give that up. I think younger generations obviously don't watch much live TV anyway. I think the decision to kind of rat out on promises to the over 75s again targets the BBC's core market. You know, you can't watch a program like Countryfile without some kind of identity politics flying at you. I think it's all too late. So I do think that the pressure will build. I think I'd liken it to the new Brexit, where the Conservatives were very slow on the uptake. The establishment media all said, this can't happen, it's too outlandish. And then, bang, it does happen.
Now, you touched on it earlier, on these reports of GB News, a potential TV news channel, as I say, you've got a lot of experience behind you in the media industry. Number one, do you think this is likely to happen? Number two, in 2020, and obviously increasing amounts of people coming on YouTube and the internet, what do you think it will take, apart from a lot of money, to make it a success?
I do think it could and should happen. I think it's not just the BBC News now, is it? It's like Sky is run by Comcast, a very woke liberal left channel, and you see that with some of their presenters really chucking impartiality overboard in the last particularly 2 years or so in the Brexit blocking time. Sky was probably more biased than the BBC, and Channel 4 has always been owned in terms of its voice by the woke left, and increasingly, ITV is up there with them. So it's what I called in the Spectator an opinion cartel. So I think the market is enormous, either for a right of centre antidote or just for a straight news channel that doesn't allow woke ID politics off the leash, keeps it under control. Now, what would we need is obviously some big names to be attached, enough money behind it, and we read that one of the proposed channels Rupert Murdoch is working on. I read, and I haven't sort of checked the full veracity of this, but that not only is Andrew Neil potentially involved in one or other, or maybe even a different alternative, or might be involved, but Nigel Farage might be involved too, who brings an enormous audience with him from social media. And I just, like we're minnows in the social media world, or in our Twitter feed compared to Nigel, but we have some tens of thousands of followers. And I think we both gauge the enormous appetite that is there just for an alternative, non-woke, non-lib left biased news channel. I think it's huge, and a couple of big names in there, and I think it could be transformative, and the other channels would have to change, or they would lose audiences very fast.
Well, it's been absolutely amazing to see the growth of this channel on YouTube, and I just want to thank those watching that have been subscribing, because every single day, tens of thousands of people watching. It's an incredible thing, and long may that continue. But look, I just want to touch on your Telegraph article, the issue. You said, and of course we've seen a lot of talk, but record illegal migrant crossings across the channel still on small boats. And you've written why, despite the channel chaos on the government's watch, Labour is even more vulnerable than the Tories on illegal migration. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, with the Tories, it's all about no delivery, isn't it? And they are kind of using the Brexit transition period as an excuse, and Chris Philp, the immigration minister, and to an extent Priti Patel, have kind of dropped heavy hints about all this amazing new legislation they've got up their sleeves. They are at least setting out in principle that they want to do the right thing, which is for the United Kingdom to have sovereignty over its borders and decide who's allowed in or not. If you listen to the Commons debate earlier this week, every single Labour and Celtic nationalist and Green and Lib Dem who contributed to that debate all came from the standpoint of the government's too tough, it's inhumane, it needs to create what they call safe and legal routes. And if in the absence of those, it's inevitable that these people are going to come here another way. Now, to my mind, only about a quarter of the British public, the sort of Guardian Easter Brigade, believes that. The rest of the people believe that the immigration system's far too soft, and that even those who aren't objecting to the scale of legal immigration, I think, feel very hostile to the idea of queue jumping, and that even if you're an honest person who has the interests of people who apply for migration to the UK through the legal channels at heart, you should be outraged to see all these young guys circumventing the legal channels, paying people traffickers, and coming in as the first criminal act, in some cases, the first, I'm afraid, of many. So I think public opinion is fast running out of patience with the government on this, but they probably will give them the run up to next year's peak crossing season and see if the new legislation is in practice, and see what other arrangements there are to disincentivize these crossings. I mean, we all know what Tony Abbott did in Australia, where he set up a process of offshore detention, and you would never set foot on the Australian mainland, and you were quite invited to be helped back to the country you came from as soon as you remembered what that was. And for all the rage of the left, that actually saved scores, if not hundreds, of lives that were being lost in the perilous crossing. The crossings stopped. So I'm unsure whether the government have the bottle to go down that road, but personally, I would be delighted if it did.
Now, you mentioned Tony Abbott there, a sort of concocted furore, though I guess is the way to describe it at the moment. I mean, there were reports that he was set to take a major trade role, of course, a former Australian PM, lots of experience, well respected. And Patrick, some people don't seem very happy about it. You've commented saying the woke left thinks someone with any conservative social values on any issue should be cancelled altogether and blocked from employment on grounds of moral defectiveness. Patrick, I hope the government don't cave on this, but do you think they will?
Well, it's what gets me, Michael, is that on every single social cultural issue, the woke left start a fight. They aim to cancel something or someone. And instead of just us being able to relax and say, well, we've got a conservative prime minister, a conservative government, a majority of 80, they'll sort this out. We have to engage in this tiresome social media tug of war against the woke left. And it's like the government is like just a marker on the rope, and we have to pull harder to get the right outcome, when it should be someone in Downing Street, Boris Johnson himself, saying, no, this isn't right. You know, and Tony Abbott is a guy who's done great trade deals for Australia. You know, he's by no means a homophobe. He attended his gay sister's wedding, and she has said he's a compassionate conservative, but he has profound socially conservative principles. Well, you'd have thought that's 100% compatible with the government that Britain elected, and yet you see a succession of government ministers, first Matt Hancock, Grant Shapps, they're unwilling to go into bat for him, and they're almost suggesting that he's not a decent person to go out for a beer with. So they're cowed. They're partly cowed, I think, because you know, they still remember the Cameron Liberal project and feel somewhat in hock to that. But I think they're also partly cowed because they're not confident that if they put their neck out to defend a situation like that, or to have a go at Black Lives Matter, or to go in hard for Rule Britannia Only, they're not confident what the line is going to be coming down the line. Boris Johnson's done so many U-turns on so many things that I think the career tendency won't stick its neck out. And so the whole thing feels rudderless, and it's up to the likes of you and me to actually try and give the Conservative Party back some moral courage. And I just find that, you know, as do many Conservative voters, very, very irritating. And it is sapping long-term faith in Boris Johnson as Prime Minister.
Well, Patrick, it's been great to talk to you again. We'll catch up again soon. And guys, if you enjoyed this, please remember to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you don't miss the next video. Patrick O'Flynn, great to chat.
Thanks, Michael. Been a pleasure.